When you first hear the title, Escape from Zombie U Reloaded, you might expect another routine entry in the endless sea of zombie survival games. But this one takes a familiar idea and twists it into something that feels satirical, self-aware, and oddly fresh. The setting isn't a military base, a burned-out city, or some abandoned mall. It's Williams College, a place that was supposed to represent higher learning, but has instead turned into a buffet line for the undead. It's here that you step into the shoes of Melody Farrington, an English teacher whose passion for words like chatoyant has suddenly been replaced with something much simpler: survival. That shift sums up the game's personality. It's funny, it's grim, and it leans hard into the absurdity of trying to fight off brain-hungry zombies with nothing but school supplies and stubborn determination. Melody isn't a hardened soldier or an action hero. She's an educator, and the way she approaches survival reflects that. Her instincts are about pushing her students to their limits, about turning even life-and-death moments into teachable opportunities. The result is a tone that mixes satire with tension, never letting you forget that while the zombies are dangerous, the whole setup is also just a little ridiculous. The game splits itself into two major modes, each playing with a different kind of tension. First is exploration mode, which isn't just about wandering the halls and looting for supplies. It follows a tabletop-inspired system, where dice rolls and character stats decide how events unfold. You might crack open a classroom door and discover a stash of pencils, potential weapons, or tools, or you might roll poorly and end up facing an ambush. That system means no two runs are the same. The randomness keeps you guessing, and it feels less like scripted set pieces and more like being dropped into a living scenario where anything could happen. For players who enjoy roguelike unpredictability, this is where the hook really sinks in. Then comes battle mode, where the pacing shifts into chaos. Imagine you're armed with chalk while your students scatter around, searching for makeshift bombs. Zombies pour in, and suddenly the game becomes less about dice and more about strategy under pressure. Not every zombie is a brainless shambler. Some of them are designed to force you to think, requiring different approaches to take them down, punishing players who try to coast on button mashing alone. This layered approach to combat keeps the adrenaline up and avoids the fatigue that often sets in with repetitive wave-based modes. You don't just mow down endless hordes, you adapt, rethink, and use whatever ridiculous supplies you've scrounged. What makes the whole thing click is how the tone stays consistent across both modes. It's a school setting, but it's also a battlefield. Chalk becomes a weapon. Homework assignments become tools for survival. A campus designed for education becomes a maze of danger, where every locked door could hide salvation or death. And throughout it all, the game never takes itself too seriously. The absurdity is intentional. Williams College isn't just another backdrop, it's a parody of both higher education and zombie tropes, a place where exams and essays have been swapped for blood and brains. Replayability is clearly baked into the design. Exploration mode thrives on randomization, and the battle mode thrives on improvisation. One run might have you lucky enough to find a classroom stocked with supplies that give you a fighting edge. Another might throw curveballs that force you into desperate gambles. The dice-driven system means players can share stories of completely different playthroughs, and that kind of variability is exactly what keeps people coming back. But beneath the humor and campy setup, there's a subtle layer of commentary. The game hints at how fragile institutions can be, how quickly the structure of education collapses when the real test is survival itself. Students, faculty, administrators, suddenly they're not mentors or learners, they're either prey or predator. Melody's role as a teacher becomes symbolic. She's still trying to instruct, but the lesson is life or death. It's a tongue-in-cheek reminder that education has always been about preparing people for the real world, even if this real world involves zombies clawing at your classroom windows. What Escape from Zombie U Reloaded achieves is balance. It's not just horror, not just comedy, not just strategy, it's all of them layered together. The dice mechanics speak to tabletop fans. The wave combat speaks to action junkies. The satirical writing speaks to players who like a wink and a nudge, while they dodge brain-munching faculty members. And because it doesn't overstay its welcome with repetitive design, it feels like a game built to entertain across multiple sessions rather than one long, predictable campaign. At its core, this is a game about creativity, on the developer's part for crafting such a weirdly specific setting, and on the player's part for figuring out how to turn everyday school supplies into weapons of survival. It's about dice rolls deciding your fate, about laughter mixing with tension, about pushing through chaos with whatever resources you can scrape together. If you've ever wanted a zombie game that doesn't just rely on blood and grit, but also imagination and parody, this one deserves your attention. So while Melody Farrington might not be writing essays on Chateaubriand anymore, she's become the kind of unlikely hero who proves survival is as much about wit as it is about strength. And in Williams College, wit might just be the sharpest weapon of all.
Here you go. Amazing. This is it. Here you go. Eat this. Here you go. Here you go. Take this! Take this! Die! Eat this! Nice! Die! Die, you stupid zombie! I have a present for you. Let go of me! Die, you stupid zombie! Here you go. Great. This should work. What's this? Let's try this. Here you go. go of me. Die. It hurts. This is it. Bring me something. Eat this. Die. Let go of me. Great! Maybe this can help. Let's try this. I have a present for you. Eat this. Eat this. Amazing. Let's try this. Eat this! Take this! Eat this! Take this! Here you go! I have a present for you. Die, you stupid zombie! Die, you stupid zombie! Take this!